Top 10 Most Hated Golden Age Celebrities of All Time. Fame doesn't necessarily translate into adoration. If anything, from some of the biggest stars in Hollywood, their legacies are defined not by what they achieved, but by the darkness they left behind. Often, we look back upon Hollywood's golden age as a land of magic and glamour, but reality behind the silver screen is so much more complicated. For every iconic figure whom people loved, there was another whose reputation caved in under the weight of their own behaviors. Exposés by those they hurt, combined with changing attitudes over time, ultimately brought their true nature to light. The most interesting thing about these despised celebrities is not just that they were hated. It is that many of them were simultaneously adored by millions, as one veteran Hollywood historian explained. These were not just divisive figures. These were stars who maintained perfect public images, while the people who actually knew them lived in fear or angst. What makes these cases particularly compelling is how thoroughly the studio system worked to conceal their true natures. Whole publicity departments existed not just to promote stars, but to actively hide behavior that would have shocked their adoring public. From parental abuse and rampant misogyny to political betrayal and even violence, the gap between image and reality was deliberately manufactured, noted a former studio publicist. The difference between the amount of worship they got during life and the scorn that followed them into death serves as a gauge of just how well Hollywood's machinery could keep even its most reprehensible stars from accountability. We're outing the 10 most actually hated stars of Hollywood's golden age, those whose legacies have been irreparably marred, not by fading relevance, but rather by the disclosure of who they really were behind the glittering facade the public was sold. Number 1. Joan Crawford, Hollywood's monstrous mother. In the public imagination of the 1940s and 1950s, Joan Crawford was the embodiment of glamour, determination, and reinvention. Rising from abject poverty into one of Hollywood's most enduring stars, she won an Academy Award for Mildred Pierce and had a career that spanned decades when most actresses, after their youth faded, were thrown upon the junk heap. This carefully cultivated image masked a private reality so disturbing that it eventually eclipsed her entire professional legacy. Crawford's reputation wasn't just tarnished when she died. It was destroyed when her daughter Christina published her 1978 Expose Mommy Dearest. The book depicted Joan not as the dutiful mother her publicity had touted, but as an abusive, alcoholic despot. Where studio publicity trumpeted her devotion to her 4 adopted children with contrived photographs and Mother of the Year citations, Christina documented midnight beatings, bizarre punishments, and psychological torture. She accused him of dragging her out of bed to scrub floors, beating her with wire hangers, hacking off her hair in fits of rage, and forcing her to shower in scalding water. According to the memoir, the household was dominated by fear and capriciousness, sculpted by obsessive control and narcissistic rage. While Crawford was already notorious for being a demanding diva, who famously clashed with Bette Davis, Mommy Dearest irreparably demolished her public image. The memoir was then made into a 1981 film starring Faye Dunaway, and Crawford's transformation into a cultural shorthand for maternal abuse was complete. The infamous no-wire hangers scene cemented her image as a monstrous caricature. The campy tone of the film, however, put some in a position to degrade the claims as hypertrophy, although Christina's claims had been corroborated by several sources. Crawford's younger twins, Cindy and Kathy, also denied Christina's account, creating a divided family narrative. This conflict did not restore Crawford's reputation. Rather, it left an eternal cloud of suspicion hanging over any discussion of her work. Number 2. Bing Crosby, the nightmare of White Christmas. For generations, Bing Crosby's warm baritone defined Christmas itself. His recording of White Christmas remains the best-selling single of all time, and his films portrayed him as the ultimate gentle, wise father figure, relaxed, patient, kind, and embodying all things wholesome about mid-century America. Behind this calm public persona, however, a far darker reality was lurking. According to his son Gary Crosby's 1983 memoir, Going My Own Way, Bing was emotionally cold and physically abusive. Gary described a childhood dominated by fear, rigid discipline, and regular beatings. The memoir recounts that Crosby necessitated weekly weigh-ins, with weight gain punished by public humiliation and corporal punishment with belts or canes weighted with metal. Publicly, Crosby was reserved and easygoing. Privately, he was said to be consumed by an obsession with corporal punishment and control. What made these revelations so devastating was how completely they contradicted the image that made Crosby beloved. The gentle priest in Going My Way, the wise father figure from his films, was fundamentally incompatible with accounts of a man who beat his children bloody for minor infractions. While some of Gary's siblings initially disputed parts of his account, his younger brother Lindsay later corroborated many of the allegations before his death in 1989, describing their father as brutal and terrifying. These revelations forced a painful reassessment of Crosby's legacy and of an era that often normalized abusive discipline. While Crosby's holiday music plays every year, it now exists in jarring contrast to the disturbing accounts of how he treated his own family, creating a lasting dissonance between public nostalgia and private cruelty. Third, Elia Kazan, Hollywood's most infamous informant. Elia Kazan's flair for raw, powerful performances from actors fitted him squarely among cinema's most important directors. Films like On the Waterfront, A Streetcar Named Desire, and East of Eden stand out as instantly recognizable American masterpieces. His artistic achievements were forever overshadowed by one decision. In 1952, Kazan appeared before the House Un-American Activities Committee and named several of his former colleagues as communists. Because he too had briefly been a member of the Communist Party during the 1930s, many viewed his decision to identify others as an unpardonable betrayal. Those he named were blacklisted, losing careers and livelihoods, while Kazan's own career continued largely uninterrupted. Those furious with him felt it wasn't so much that Kazan had cooperated, but that he never publicly showed any regret. He publicly defended his actions and later justified them in his autobiography. When Kazan was granted an honorary Oscar in 1999, almost half the audience refused to applaud. It was an electrifying moment, a true symbol of Hollywood's divisive opinion regarding his legacy. Even decades later, his testimony is inseparable in discussions of his work. Some have also pointed out that On the Waterfront is itself a justification of informing, an added layer of controversy if there ever was one. The Kazan case remains perhaps the most stark example of how a man's personal actions can forever tarnish his artistic legacy. Number 4. Charlie Chaplin, the fallen icon. Few figures in entertainment history have inspired universal adoration as Charlie Chaplin once did. His Little Tramp character spoke no language and crossed all borders to make him the world's first truly global celebrity. Yet, Chaplin's reputation collapsed under the weight of personal scandals and political suspicion. Chaplin's relationships with teenage girls, including marriages to girls as young as 16, created increasing public discomfort. Though such age gaps were more tolerated at the time, the pattern of pursuing very young women transformed his image from romantic to predatory. A paternity suit, highly publicized in the 1940s, further tarnished his reputation, along with accusations of communist sympathies during the Cold War. Though Chaplin was never a member of the Communist Party, his refusals to deny such allegations made him a target. When Chaplin traveled abroad in 1952, his re-entry permit to the United States was revoked. Instead of returning and fighting, he settled in Switzerland, thus bringing his American career to an end. He briefly returned to the United States in 1972 to accept an honorary Oscar, but his reputation was never restored. Chaplin's case shows how fast the wheel of public opinion can spin, sometimes against icons of popular culture themselves, and how personal behavior can forever complicate an artistic legacy. Number 5. Rex Harrison, Hollywood's cruelest gentleman. On screen, Rex Harrison was the very model of refined British charm, the recipient of accolades for starring roles in My Fair Lady and Dr. Dolittle. Off-screen, he was notorious as perhaps the most obnoxious and sadistic man in Hollywood. Harrison was reportedly abusive towards co-stars, most especially women. His infamous treatment of Audrey Hepburn during My Fair Lady was only the tip of an iceberg, as well as having a general habit of belittling colleagues and making them cry. Julie Andrews famously described him as the rudest man she had ever worked with. What made Harrison different was not intermittent bad temper, but willful, calculated cruelty, treating people according to their station, with contempt for the weaker fly on his web. Tales of humiliation, emotional cruelties, and behavior to take your breath away followed him throughout his career. Number 6. Gene Kelly. The dark side of the smiling perfectionist. Gene Kelly's athletic grace and infectious smile made him the embodiment of Hollywood musical joy. Films such as Singin' in the Rain, An American in Paris, and On the Town showcased his extraordinary ability while building up an image of Kelly as the ultimate positive, energetic entertainer. This upbeat public persona masked a demanding perfectionism that, according to many who worked with him, crossed into real cruelty, particularly toward the female dancers and actresses expected to meet his exacting standards. A dance historian once called Kelly an on-set tyrant who, in the quest for perfection, often shoved co-stars to the breaking point. Debbie Reynolds has said Kelly worked her so hard on Singin' in the Rain her feet bled and she had to be carried to her dressing room. 19-year-old Reynolds had no formal training. Kelly and Donald O'Connor did. And Kelly was unforgiving of her inexperience. Reynolds later remembered rehearsing for months on end, 7 days a week, until exhaustion took over and she was crying and physically broken. Kelly was brilliant, she said, but brutal to work for, disapproved of everything she did, made her repeat routines until her feet were raw. What really makes this treatment particularly troubling is the power dynamic involved. With Kelly being her co-star and director, he had full control over Reynolds' performance and career prospects. Number 7. John Wayne. The problematic American icon. John Wayne incarnated a specific version of American masculinity over generations. His performances in westerns and war films cemented his status as the tough, principled hero who was always straightforward, patriotic, and uncompromising. In the decades to come, however, this legacy would change dramatically as Wayne's personal views on race, politics, and indigenous peoples came anew under attack. One film historian noted that the damage to Wayne's reputation really occurred when a 1971 Playboy interview resurfaced, in which he said, "I believe in white supremacy." In that same interview, he continued to justify the displacement of Native Americans, expressing views that were, by then, considered explicitly racist and indefensible. Wayne's politics were always outspoken and conservative, but less investigated in the case of these particular racial comments during his lifetime. Rediscovery has compelled a deeper look into his legacy. The difficulty is separating the man from the heroic roles he played. Number 8. Hedda Hopper. Hollywood's feared gossip queen. Though never a movie star herself, Hedda Hopper was an extraordinarily powerful figure in Hollywood, becoming the most influential gossip columnist of her time. During the 1930s through the 1960s, her syndicated column reached millions and could make or destroy careers overnight. One media historian referred to Hopper as a former failed actress turned columnist who weaponized gossip to enforce her moral and political views, using her platform not to report on Hollywood, but to police its shaming stars, threatening exposure, and promoting conservative ideology. Hopper's power came as much from what she didn't publish, but from what she did print. Stars feared the exposure of secrets ranging from political affiliations to sexuality and personal relationships. This fear gave her enormous leverage over studios and performers alike. During the Blacklist era, Hopper had openly supported the House Un-American Activities Committee and had used her column to pressure Hollywood into blacklisting suspected communists. She praised those who named names and attacked those who resisted, directly contributing to destroyed careers. Number 9. Jerry Lewis. From beloved clown to bitter recluse. He was once the most beloved comedian in the world, adored for his physical comedy and childlike persona. The years wore that image away, though, replaced with a reputation for arrogance, cruelty, and deeply problematic public statements. An entertainment journalist weighed in that Lewis became increasingly cantankerous after his breakup with Dean Martin. Given absolute creative control, he reportedly regarded his collaborators with disdain and developed an overactive sense of self-importance, wherein he referred to himself as the total filmmaker. The media further destroyed Lewis's persona with hostile interviews and disdainful handling of journalists. His contemptuous behavior became part of his public persona, transforming him from comedic genius into an entitled celebrity. Of course, the more damaging moments came courtesy of Lewis's musings on female comedians. He publicly spoke about not enjoying any female comics, doubling down on the notion that women could not be funny like men. Certainly, the comments that sealed his reputation as misogynistic and out of touch. Lewis's long attachment to the Muscular Dystrophy Association telethon further complicated his legacy. While raising billions for the cause, his portrayal of disabled people was increasingly criticized as patronizing and harmful. His ouster as host in 2011 further isolated him from the industry. By the time Lewis passed away in 2017, his legacy had become extremely polarized. His comedy contributions were noted, but the respect felt for him was beyond repair due to his own actions and words. Number 10. Frank Sinatra, the chairman of intimidation. Frank Sinatra was the complete artist. As an important singer of the 20th century and even a winner of the Oscar for Best Actor, his influence on music and popular culture is enormous. Yet this brilliance surely coexisted with a volatile temperament and troubling associations. One music historian called Sinatra a bully with a violent temper that everybody knew about. He beat up on journalists and photographers and tried to intimidate his way through toward the control of his public image. So a climate of fear existed among those who did reports about him. Sinatra demanded absolute loyalty and obedience from those around him. Those who crossed him could find themselves blacklisted or excluded from opportunities. The famous warning not to say no to him reflected a genuine operating principle rather than bravado. His personal relationships, especially with women, were marked by jealousy and domination. The marriage to Mia Farrow was particularly troubled. Afterward, Farrow described her feelings of diminishment and pressure to forsake her own career. The documented connections to organized crime figures further complicate his legacy. His friendships with known mob leaders were not peripheral, but central to his personal life, raising lasting questions about judgment and ethics. The case of Sinatra thus remains one of Hollywood's most complex. His voice brought comfort and beauty to millions, even as his behavior caused real harm to those who experienced his temper and intimidation firsthand. His legacy resists simple moral judgment, defined by both transcendent artistry and deeply troubling conduct.